The hardest part about betrayal is that it never comes from your enemies. It comes from those you thought you knew, those you thought loved you. For 43 years, I built a life with a man I adored, raised a son we both cherished, and created a legacy that would last generations. And in the end, I watched my son spit on his father's memory before the dirt had even settled on his grave. I tried to show him that legacy isn't just about money, it's about honor. But some lessons can only be taught through consequence. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. My name is Stephanie Coleman. For most of my adult life, I was known as Stephanie Coleman, wife of William Coleman, CEO of Coleman Developments. Now, at 62, I'm just Stephanie. And that's more than enough. I met William when I was 19 and he was 24, both of us working at a small architecture firm in Boston. He had vision, ambition, and beneath all that drive, a gentle heart that few people ever got to see. We married within a year, and I put my own architectural studies on hold to support his dreams. Not because I had to, but because I believed in him, in us. William built Coleman Developments from nothing. I was there for every late night, every setback, every triumph. I reviewed contracts at our kitchen table while pregnant with our son, Matthew. I hosted dinners with potential investors, charmed city officials, and stood silently supportive at every ribbon-cutting ceremony. Behind every successful man, they say. But I was never behind William. I was beside him, even when the photographers cropped me out of the frame. Matthew was born when the company was still struggling. William worked 80-hour weeks to ensure our son would have opportunities neither of us had. And I raised Matthew largely alone, teaching him about resilience, integrity, and the value of hard work. Or at least I thought I did. The truth is, I failed. I can see that now, looking back. We gave Matthew everything. The best schools, international vacations, connections most people would kill for. But somewhere along the way, the ease with which these privileges came to him warped his understanding of how the world works. By the time he graduated from business school, I could see what William couldn't. Our son believed he deserved success without earning it. "He'll learn," William would say whenever I expressed concern. "He's young. He'll mature." But Matthew didn't mature. He merely became more sophisticated in his entitlement. When he was 28, William finally convinced me to let Matthew join the company. "He needs guidance," William insisted. "Structure, mentorship." I relented, despite my reservations. Matthew started in project management, a position most employees worked years to achieve. Within 6 months, he'd alienated half the team with his arrogance. Within a year, he'd cost the company a major contract by making promises he couldn't keep to a client he'd tried to impress at a nightclub. Still, William protected him. "He's learning," he'd say after each disaster, writing off hundreds of thousands in losses as tuition for the real world. I watched my husband age a decade in those 3 years. The stress of covering for Matthew's mistakes, of trying to mold him into a worthy successor, weighed on him. The heart attack came on a Tuesday. Matthew was in Cabo San Lucas, supposedly at a real estate conference. In reality, he was on a yacht with friends. His phone turned off. He didn't make it back for the final hours. Didn't hear his father's last words. Didn't see the disappointment in William's eyes when he asked for Matthew and was met with my silence. "Take care of the company, Ellie," William had whispered, his hand cold in mine. It was always meant for both of us. I nodded, thinking he was delirious from the medication. William had never once suggested I take over Coleman Developments. I was the supporting player, the steady hand behind the scenes. I had my small architectural consulting business that I'd built over the years, but nothing that prepared me to run a company with over 200 employees. Or so I thought. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday. Matthew finally arrived from Mexico on Friday night, sunburned and reeking of expensive cologne. He hugged me perfunctorily in the foyer of the home William and I had shared for 30 years. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked, already scrolling through his phone. "As well as can be expected," I replied, watching him carefully. At 31, my son resembled his father physically, the same square jaw, the same blue eyes. But where William's gaze had always held warmth and integrity, Matthew's eyes were cold, calculating. "I've been thinking," he said, helping himself to William's prized scotch without asking. "We should postpone the board meeting scheduled for Monday. I'll need time to review the quarterly reports before taking over." The casual presumption stunned me, though it shouldn't have. "Taking over?" I echoed. Matthew looked annoyed at having to explain. "Dad's position, CEO. We should probably announce the transition at the funeral, actually. Might be good for investor confidence to show a smooth succession." I sat down slowly on the sofa, my legs suddenly weak. "Your father's body isn't even in the ground yet." He shrugged, as if this were an inconvenient detail. "Business doesn't stop for grief, Mom. Dad taught me that." "No," I thought. "Your father taught you that duty doesn't stop for grief. There's a difference." "The funeral," I said quietly. "We should focus on that first." Matthew nodded absently, then glanced at his watch. "I've got some calls to make. Is my old room made up?" Without waiting for an answer, he disappeared upstairs, leaving his half-empty tumbler on William's antique desk, the one piece of furniture my husband had insisted on keeping from his own father's modest home. A legacy of actual meaning. I sat alone in the gathering darkness, listening to Matthew's voice drift down from above as he spoke to someone on the phone. "Yeah, it's a drag, but at least the timing works out with the Anderson contract." "No, the old man never signed the final paperwork so we can adjust the terms. Better margin for us." "Yeah, I'm thinking St. Bart's for Christmas this year. I'll be able to afford the villa by then." I stood up, my hands shaking. I needed air. In the garden William had so lovingly tended, I called Patricia Winters, William's executive assistant for the past 15 years, and one of the few people who knew exactly how involved I'd been in company decisions over the years. "Stephanie," she answered, her voice thick with tears. "I was just about to call you. How are you?" "Patricia," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I need everything William was working on. All files, all contracts in progress, all board meeting minutes from the past year. And I need his laptop." A pause, then understanding. "When do you need them?" "Tonight. I'll be there in an hour." I ended the call and stood very still among William's roses, watching the last light fade from the sky. In the upstairs window, I could see Matthew's silhouette, gesturing animatedly as he talked, planning his future with my husband's company. A cold clarity settled over me. All those years watching William build his empire, all those nights reviewing contracts and strategy documents, all those quiet conversations about leadership and legacy, I had absorbed more than either of us realized. Matthew thought he was coming home to claim a throne he hadn't earned. He was about to discover that the kingdom had already found its queen. When Patricia arrived with boxes of files and William's laptop, Matthew was still upstairs, now loudly discussing vacation properties with someone named Tyler. "The board meeting," I whispered to Patricia in the foyer. "Is it still on the calendar for Monday morning?" She nodded, her intelligent eyes assessing me. 9 a.m. William was planning to announce the Anderson contract. It's the biggest deal in company history. And who knows about the deal specifics? Just William, legal, and me. Matthew thinks he knows, but William was concerned about Matthew's discretion. He adjusted the final terms last week. Matthew hasn't seen them. I took a deep breath. Good. Let's keep it that way until Monday. "Stephanie," Patricia said carefully, "are you thinking of—" "I'm thinking," I interrupted, "that my husband built something extraordinary, and I won't watch it be dismantled by someone who sees it as nothing but an ATM." Patricia studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "The board respects you, Stephanie. They always have. But Matthew's been telling people he's the obvious successor. He's been courting votes." "Has he?" I smiled thinly. "Then Monday should be interesting." After Patricia left, I carried the files to William's home office and closed the door. I had 48 hours until the funeral, 72 hours until the board meeting, and a lifetime of watching and learning to draw upon. On the desk before me sat William's succession plan, the one Matthew knew nothing about, the one that named me as interim CEO with full decision-making authority. "Take care of the company, Ellie," William had said, not in delirium, but with perfect clarity. And so I would. I didn't sleep that night. I worked through William's files until sunrise, acquainting myself with the details of the Anderson contract, a $400 million development project that would transform an abandoned industrial district into a sustainable urban village. The type of project William had always been most proud of. Profitable, yes, but also meaningful. The kind that created jobs, revitalized communities, and would stand as a legacy long after we were gone. The morning of my husband's funeral dawned bright and clear, a mockery of a day, too beautiful for such darkness. I dressed carefully in a tailored black suit William had always admired. Power with elegance, he'd called it. Appropriate, given what lay ahead. I applied my makeup with precision, armoring myself for the performance to come. Matthew emerged from his room at the last possible moment, his tie askew and his eyes bloodshot. Hangover or grief? I couldn't tell. Perhaps both. "Ready?" I asked, my voice neutral. He nodded, checking his phone. "I've drafted a short statement to make at the reception, about taking the helm and honoring Dad's legacy. I'll run it by PR when we get there." I said nothing, just gathered my purse and led the way to the waiting car. The church was filled beyond capacity. William had been respected, even beloved in the business community and beyond. Developers, architects, city officials, employees, all came to pay their respects. I received their condolences with composure, accepting embraces and murmured sympathies with quiet dignity. Matthew worked the room like a campaign event, shaking hands and accepting condolences with practiced phrases that never quite reached his eyes. I watched him corner board members, speaking intently, nodding with false solemnity. The service itself was beautiful in its simplicity. William would have approved. Our oldest friends spoke of his integrity, his vision, his unwavering principles. His younger brother told stories that made even me laugh through tears, memories of the mischievous boy who became the man I loved. When it came time for Matthew to speak, he approached the podium with a confident stride. "My father," he began, "was a great man, a visionary. He built Coleman Developments from nothing into one of the most respected firms in the country." Standard eulogy fare, delivered with appropriate gravity. But then, he always told me, "Matthew, success isn't about the money. It's about the legacy you leave behind. And I intend to honor that legacy by taking Coleman Developments to new heights, building on the foundation he created." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Even at a funeral, Matthew couldn't resist staking his claim. I kept my expression carefully neutral, even as rage churned beneath my composed exterior. This wasn't about William at all. This was Matthew's coronation speech. As the new chief executive of Coleman Developments, I promised to— "Matthew." I spoke just loudly enough to cut through his words, rising slowly to my feet. "This isn't the time or place." His face flushed. "I'm honoring my father's memory, Mom." "Then honor it with silence," I said evenly. "Today isn't about business succession. It's about saying goodbye." For a moment, rebellion flashed in his eyes. Then, sensing the mood of the room turning against him, he nodded stiffly. "Of course. I apologize." The service continued. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel grief, it consumed me, but because I needed clarity. Tears would come later, in private, when this was done. At the graveside, I placed a single white rose on William's casket. Matthew stood apart, checking his watch repeatedly, clearly impatient for the business of death to conclude so he could get on with the business of taking what he believed was his. The reception was held at our home. As guests mingled and shared memories of William, I noticed Matthew deep in conversation with James Harlow, our chief financial officer. Their heads bent close together, voices low, planning already. I approached quietly, catching the tail end of their exchange. "Can restructure the Anderson deal," Matthew was saying. "Increase our margin by at least 15%. The old man was leaving too much on the table." James looked uncomfortable. "Your father designed that deal very specifically, Matthew. The profit margins are intentionally balanced against community investment." Matthew waved this off. "That's public relations fluff. We can maintain the appearance of community investment while reworking the numbers. No one will know the difference." James noticed me then, his eyes widening slightly in warning. Matthew turned. "Mom," he said smoothly. "James and I were just discussing some company matters." "So I heard," I replied. "Interesting perspective on your father's work." Matthew had the grace to look momentarily abashed, but recovered quickly. Dad was brilliant, but sometimes too idealistic. The business needs pragmatism now. I smiled thinly. We all have different definitions of pragmatism, I suppose. As I walked away, I heard Matthew mutter to James, "She doesn't understand business. Never has. If only he knew." The hours passed. Guests departed. Eventually, only Matthew and I remained in the large house that suddenly felt both empty and suffocating. "I'm heading out," he announced, car keys in hand. "Meeting some friends for drinks." "On the day of your father's funeral?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. He sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. "I need to decompress, Mom. Everyone grieves differently." "And how exactly are you grieving, Matthew? I haven't seen evidence of it yet." His face hardened. "Just because I'm not falling apart doesn't mean I don't care. Dad wouldn't want us sitting around crying. He'd want us moving forward." "Moving forward," I repeated. "Is that what you call restructuring the Anderson deal before your father is even cold in his grave?" He stiffened. "You were eavesdropping." "In my own home? At my husband's funeral reception?" "Yes, I suppose I was." "You don't understand business, Mom. Dad protected you from the hard realities. Sometimes tough decisions need to be made." I stepped closer, holding his gaze. "William never protected me from anything. We were partners in every sense. Who do you think reviewed every major contract before he signed it? Who do you think he called when the Wilson project nearly collapsed in '97? Matthew blinked, genuinely surprised. Then his expression settled into patronizing indulgence. "Sure, Mom. You were his sounding board. That's nice. But running a company like Coleman requires actual business expertise." "Like yours?" I asked quietly. "Tell me, what exactly have you contributed to the company these past 3 years? Besides draining resources, alienating employees, and requiring your father to clean up your messes?" His face flushed dark red. "You're upset. Emotional. We'll talk tomorrow when you're thinking more clearly?" "I'm thinking perfectly clearly," I said. "For the first time in years, perhaps. And I'll see you Monday. At the board meeting." Confusion crossed his features. "You don't need to attend, Mom. I can handle it." I smiled. "Oh, I'll be there. 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." He left shortly after, clearly dismissing our conversation as the ramblings of a grieving widow. I watched his car disappear down the driveway, then returned to William's office to continue my preparations. Sunday passed in a blur of documents and phone calls. I spoke with each board member individually, expressing my concerns about the company's future direction. I reviewed the succession plan with our corporate attorney, confirming what I already knew. William had left me in control. By Sunday evening, everything was in place. I packed a small overnight bag and checked into the Four Seasons downtown, 2 blocks from Coleman headquarters. I needed neutral ground, space to think without the ghost of William and the lingering presence of Matthew distracting me. In my hotel room, I ordered room service and laid out my clothes for the morning. Another power suit, this one charcoal gray with the subtlest pinstripe. William's favorite watch, the vintage Cartier I'd given him on our 20th anniversary, slipped easily onto my wrist, its weight a comforting reminder of his presence. "I'm doing this for both of us," I told his memory as I reviewed my notes one final time. "For everything we built, for the legacy he would destroy without a second thought." I slept dreamlessly that night, waking before my alarm. I dressed methodically, armor for the battle ahead. In the bathroom mirror, I hardly recognized myself. This steel-spined woman with clear eyes and resolute expression. Grief had not diminished me. It had distilled me to my essence. By 8:30 a.m., I was in the building. Patricia met me at the executive elevator, professional as always despite the emotion in her eyes. "Everything's ready," she said simply, handing me a leather portfolio containing the materials I'd requested. "Thank you," I replied, "for everything." The boardroom was empty when I arrived. I took my time, setting up my materials at the head of the table. William's place, my place now. I was reviewing my notes when the first board members arrived. Their surprise at finding me there was evident, but they greeted me warmly. One by one, they took their usual seats, murmuring among themselves. At precisely 2 minutes before 9, Matthew strode in, already talking on his phone. He stopped abruptly in the doorway, eyes widening at the sight of me at the head of the table. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, then disconnected. "Mom? What are you doing?" I smiled. "Taking my seat, Matthew. The meeting's about to begin." "There must be some misunderstanding," Matthew said, his voice tight as he approached the table. "I called this meeting to discuss transition plans." I smiled placidly. "There's no misunderstanding, Matthew. Please, take a seat. We're about to begin." His eyes darted around the room, gauging the reactions of the board members. Most avoided his gaze, suddenly fascinated by their notepads or tablets. Only James Harlow offered a small, apologetic shrug. Matthew took the empty chair to my right, the seat traditionally reserved for the COO, a position he'd never earned but clearly felt entitled to. I could feel tension radiating from him, the careful facade of control beginning to crack. "Good morning, everyone," I said, addressing the room. "Thank you for being here during what is, for all of us, a difficult time. William's absence is deeply felt, but he would expect us to continue the work he valued so highly." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Before we proceed, I'd like to address the question of succession. I opened the leather portfolio Patricia had prepared, removing a sealed envelope. As you know, William was meticulous in his planning. This is his formal succession plan, which has been on file with our corporate attorneys since last year's annual review. Matthew shifted in his seat. "Mom, this isn't necessary today. I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Our attorney, Mr. Abernathy, has confirmed its validity. I'll summarize the key points." I broke the seal and removed the document, though I already knew its contents by heart. "William has named me, Stephanie Coleman, as interim CEO for a period of 12 months, with full executive authority. During this period, the board will conduct a thorough search for a permanent CEO, considering both internal and external candidates based on qualifications and alignment with company values." The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the soft hum of the ventilation system, the distant ping of an elevator down the hall. Matthew's face had drained of color. "That can't be right," he said, his voice hollow. "Dad always intended for me to take over. Everyone knows that." I turned to him, my expression neutral. "Your father intended for the most qualified person to lead this company. He never promised you the position, Matthew. He promised you the opportunity to earn it." "This is ridiculous," he said, voice rising. "I've been working here for 3 years, being groomed for leadership." "Have you?" I asked mildly. "Because from where I stand, where your father stood, you've been collecting a salary while contributing very little. The Fisher account? Loss due to your negligence? The Harrison project? Behind schedule and over budget under your supervision. The client complaint file is quite thick, I'm afraid." His face flushed dark red. "You're making me sound incompetent. I've brought in major clients." "You've entertained potential clients at company expense," I corrected. "Most of whom ultimately signed because of William's reputation, not your happy hour budget." James Harlow cleared his throat. "If I may, Stephanie, while Matthew has had some learning experiences, he has shown potential. Perhaps a transitional arrangement where he works alongside you." "That won't be necessary, James," I interrupted smoothly. "The succession plan is clear. I'll be assuming full CEO responsibilities effective immediately." Matthew stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "This is a power grab, plain and simple. My mother is using my father's death to take control of a company she has no experience running." I remained seated, calm in the face of his outburst. "I've been involved in every major decision at Coleman Developments for 43 years, Matthew. I drafted our first winning proposal. I negotiated the land acquisition for Westlake that saved us millions. I personally revised the architectural plans for the Monarch when the city rejected our initial design." The board members exchanged glances. They knew. They'd always known. But William's larger-than-life presence had sometimes overshadowed my contributions. Not anymore. "Your mother is correct," said Margaret Sanders, our longest-serving board member. Stephanie has been the silent partner in this company's success for decades. William relied on her judgment enormously. Matthew looked around the table desperately. Are you all just going to sit there? This isn't what my father would have wanted. Actually, I said, removing another document from the portfolio. Here's an email William sent to Mr. Abernathy last month. Let me read you the relevant portion. Stephanie understands this company's mission better than anyone, including myself. If anything should happen to me before Matthew demonstrates the necessary maturity and judgment, I have absolute confidence in her ability to lead. Matthew's hands clenched into fists at his sides. This is temporary then, just until I'm deemed ready. If you're selected by the board after the 12-month interim period, yes, though qualification will be determined by performance metrics, not DNA. I turned back to the board. Now, shall we move on to the Anderson contract? I believe we're scheduled to finalize terms this week. Mom, Matthew hissed, leaning toward me. You can't do this. You don't understand what's at stake. I met his gaze evenly. I understand perfectly what's at stake. The company your father built, the values he stood for, the people who depend on Coleman for their livelihoods. That's precisely why I'm doing this. Margaret Sanders nodded. I think we should proceed with the agenda. Matthew, please take your seat or excuse yourself from the meeting. For a moment, I thought he might storm out. Instead, he slowly sank back into his chair, a muscle working in his jaw, eyes burning with humiliation and rage. Thank you, I said, turning to the presentation screen. Now, regarding the Anderson contract. As you know, this represents the largest project in company history. William finalized the terms last week, maintaining our standard profit margin while allocating an additional 12% to community development funds, affordable housing units, and sustainable infrastructure. I clicked through slides showing the project details, acutely aware of Matthew seething beside me. When I reached the financial projections, he interrupted. These margins are absurdly low, he said. We're leaving millions on the table to fund community gardens and subsidized housing. We should be maximizing profit, not playing charity. The room went silent. I turned to him slowly. That charity, as you call it, is what distinguishes Coleman Developments from every other developer in this market. It's why clients choose us. It's why cities fast-track our permits. It's why we attract the best talent in the industry. And it's non-negotiable. It's bad business, he insisted. No, I replied quietly. It's your father's legacy, the real one. Not the bank accounts or the property holdings, but the communities we've helped build, the lives we've improved, the reputation for integrity we've earned. I addressed the board again. I move that we approve the Anderson contract as finalized by William, without modification. All in favor? Every hand around the table rose, except Matthew's. His face was a mask of barely controlled fury. Motion carries, I noted. Patricia will circulate the final documents this afternoon for signatures. I moved efficiently through the remaining agenda items, aware that with each passing minute, Matthew's anger was hardening into something colder, more calculated. When I finally adjourned the meeting, board members filed out quickly, offering congratulations that Matthew received like physical blows. When we were alone, he turned to me. You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself, I replied evenly. The moment you decided your father's death was an opportunity rather than a tragedy. I'm his son, his only child. This company should be mine. This company belongs to its shareholders, its employees, and the communities it serves. It was never yours to inherit like some feudal estate. Matthew gathered his things, movements sharp with anger. This isn't over. Actually, it is, I said. But there's one more thing you should know. Effective immediately, your position with Coleman Developments is terminated. He froze, incredulous. You're firing me? You can't do that. I can, and I have. Your personal items will be packed and sent to your apartment. Your access cards have already been deactivated. On what grounds? He demanded. Breach of fiduciary duty, misuse of company resources. The audit report makes for interesting reading. I closed my portfolio. Did you really think your father didn't know about the expenses you classified as client development? The unauthorized bonuses? The weekends in Cabo charged to the company credit card? The blood drained from his face. Dad never said anything. No, I agreed. He was trying to protect you, even as you took advantage of his generosity. I'm not so inclined. Matthew's expression shifted from shock to cold hatred. You'll regret this. I'm his son. The board will never accept you long-term. I stood, gathering my things. Perhaps. But I don't need long-term, Matthew. I just need long enough to make sure you never get your hands on what William built. He leaned in, voice low and venomous. You think you've won? I know things about this company you don't. I have friends you haven't met. This is just the first round. I met his gaze without flinching. Then you should know that I fight to win, Matthew. Not for myself, but for William. For everything he stood for that you were too selfish to understand. As I walked to the door, he called after me. He wouldn't recognize you like this. Cold. Ruthless. This isn't you, Mom. I paused, hand on the doorknob. You're wrong. This is exactly who I am. The woman who helped build an empire. The partner your father trusted above all others. You just never bothered to see me until now. I left him standing alone in the boardroom, surrounded by the evidence of his failure. The first battle was won. But as I rode the elevator to my new office, William's office, I knew the war had just begun. Matthew didn't go quietly. I hadn't expected him to. Within days, he began making calls to board members, to clients, to longtime employees. His message was consistent. His grieving mother had suffered a psychological break, seizing control in a moment of emotional instability, a temporary situation that would soon be rectified. Meanwhile, I worked. 16-hour days at first, familiarizing myself with every active project, every contract, every employee's performance record. The company William and I had built together deserved nothing less than my complete dedication. William's office, my office now, remained largely unchanged. I couldn't bring myself to redecorate, not yet. His presence lingered in the space, in the carefully organized bookshelves, in the view he'd loved of the city skyline. Some mornings I'd arrive early just to sit in the quiet, feeling him there with me, approving of what I was doing. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Patricia knocked on my door, her expression troubled. Stephanie, we have a situation with the Anderson contract. I set down my pen. What kind of situation? Jeremy Anderson called. He's concerned. Says he got a call from Matthew suggesting the company is in transitional turmoil and that the project timeline might be affected. A cold fury settled in my chest. Did he? Now. There's more, Patricia continued. Matthew apparently implied that certain promises William made about community investments might need to be reconsidered under new leadership. Meaning me. Yes. He told Anderson you might not honor William's commitments to the affordable housing component. I stood, smoothing my skirt. Call Mr. Anderson back. Tell him I'll be at his office in an hour. The Anderson Group's headquarters occupied the top floors of a gleaming downtown tower. Jeremy Anderson himself met me in the lobby, his handshake firm, but his expression wary. Stephanie, he said carefully, thank you for coming on such short notice. Some matters can't wait, I replied, especially when my husband's reputation is involved. In his corner office, with the city spread out below us, I laid out the original contract documents. These are the exact terms William finalized before his passing, I said, including the full commitment to affordable housing units, the community center, and the sustainable design elements. Anderson reviewed the papers. This matches our understanding. But your son suggested, my son, I interrupted quietly, no longer speaks for Coleman Developments. He was terminated for cause immediately following the board meeting 3 weeks ago. Anderson's eyebrows rose. I see. He represented himself as having significant influence over company direction, a misconception he seems determined to perpetuate. I leaned forward slightly. Jeremy, William, and I built this company on integrity. Every promise we've made, we've kept. That won't change under my leadership. He studied me for a long moment. I believe you. But I should warn you, Matthew has been quite persistent. He's reached out to several members of my team. Persistent, I echoed. An interesting word choice. What would you call it? I'd call it corporate sabotage. I kept my voice level, and I intend to address it directly. I left Anderson's office with our agreement intact, but a new weight on my shoulders. Matthew wasn't simply nursing wounded pride. He was actively trying to undermine the company, to damage it badly enough that the board would have no choice but to reconsider his termination. Back at Coleman headquarters, I called an emergency meeting with our legal team. I want to know every legal option available, I told them. Matthew has crossed a line from personal vendetta to actionable interference with business relationships. Our head counsel, David Wright, frowned as he made notes. We can certainly issue a cease and desist. If we can document actual damages, there's potential for litigation. Draft the cease and desist immediately, I instructed. And I want security protocols reviewed, all of them. Server access, building access, document retention, everything. You think he might try something more direct? David asked. I think my son believed he was entitled to a $500 million company simply by virtue of his last name, I replied. People with that mindset rarely accept rejection gracefully. That evening, alone in the house William and I had shared, I poured a glass of his favorite scotch and sat in his study. The weight of the day, of the past month, settled heavily on my shoulders. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if I had gone too far, if William would have handled things differently, if there had been another way. Then I remembered Matthew's voice on the phone the night before the funeral, planning his luxury vacation with his father's money, the casual disregard with which he had spoken of William's carefully constructed business principles, the absolute certainty that he deserved what he had never earned. No, there had been no other way. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Unknown number. Stephanie Coleman, I answered. Mom. Matthew's voice, slightly slurred. Enjoying your power trip? I said nothing, just waited. Silent treatment? Real mature. He laughed, a bitter sound. You know, I've been talking to people. Important people. Clients. Friends of Dad's. They're all pretty shocked by how you've handled things. Are they? I kept my voice neutral. Nobody believes you can run Coleman. They're just humoring the grieving widow. You know that, right? Is there a point to this call, Matthew? The point, he said, voice hardening, is that you can't win this. The Anderson deal? That's just the beginning. I know where all the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. Are you threatening me? I'm giving you a chance to fix this. Reinstate me. Give me a real leadership position. We announce a succession plan with a clear timeline. We both save face. I took a slow sip of scotch, letting the silence stretch between us. Or, he continued, I start making more calls. I have evidence of some of Dad's less than perfect business practices over the years. Things that wouldn't look good if they came to light. My hand tightened around the glass. You would damage your father's reputation out of spite? I would protect what should be mine. His voice was cold now, the alcohol-induced looseness gone. Ball's in your court, Mom. You have until the end of the week to make the right decision. The line went dead. I set down the phone carefully, as if it might bite. So this was what it had come to. My son, threatening to smear his father's name, to potentially harm the company hundreds of people depended on for their livelihoods, all to salve his wounded ego. I had hoped, perhaps naively, that the decisive action at the board meeting would end this, that Matthew would retreat, nurse his wounds, perhaps even reflect on his behavior. Instead, he had escalated, moving from sabotage to blackmail. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Patricia found me at my desk at 7, reviewing old files. You look like you haven't slept, she observed, setting a cup of coffee beside me. I received a call from Matthew last night, I said. He's threatening to release information that could damage William's reputation and the company. Patricia's expression hardened. What kind of information? I don't know. It could be nothing, just bluffing. Or it could be something, she finished. William was ethical to his core, but 40 years in business. Everyone has secrets, I agreed. And Matthew was privy to more of the inner workings than most. I closed the file I'd been reviewing. Get me everything Matthew had access to in the last 3 years, every project, every meeting he attended, every document he could have seen. And tell David I need to speak with him immediately. Patricia nodded. What are you going to do? I looked up at her. My decision already made. I'm going to protect what William built, whatever it takes. For 3 days, I prepared for war. Our legal team worked around the clock, reviewing every project Matthew had touched, every meeting he'd attended, every document he might have copied. We changed security protocols, passwords, and access codes. I personally called each board member to warn them of potential contact from Matthew, framing it as concern for a son clearly struggling with grief rather than admitting to the raw truth. My son had become my enemy. By Thursday, I had a clearer picture of what Matthew might know and what he might use against us, against William. There were 3 vulnerable points. The Westlake acquisition in 2015, where a zoning board member had received a consulting fee through a third party after approving our permits. The Carlton project, where we discovered structural deficiencies mid-construction but had adjusted the designs rather than starting over, potentially skirting building codes. And the tax strategies William had employed during the 2008 recession, aggressive but legal, though easily misrepresented to sound nefarious. None were truly damning. None were William's direct doing. But each, if twisted and taken out of context, could tarnish the sterling reputation he'd built over decades, the reputation that was now mine to protect. Matthew's deadline, the end of the week, loomed. I had no intention of giving in to his demands, but neither could I allow him to damage Coleman Developments out of spite. I needed to neutralize the threat permanently. Friday morning, I called the one person who might help me do just that. Daniel? I said when he answered. It's Stephanie Coleman. I need a favor. Daniel Patterson had been William's college roommate and remained his closest friend. He was also one of the most powerful corporate attorneys in the state, though he no longer practiced actively. If anyone knew all of William's secrets and how to protect them, it was Daniel. We met for lunch at a quiet restaurant outside the city. His expression was grave as I explained the situation. Matthew's always been entitled, he said when I finished. But this, William would be devastated. William isn't here, I replied. I am. And I need to know if there's anything else Matthew could use against us. Something I don't know about. Daniel was silent for a long moment, studying his water glass. Finally, he sighed. There is one thing. The River Point development in 2010. My stomach tightened. River Point had been one of our most successful projects. A mixed-use development that had transformed a blighted area into a thriving community. What about it? The environmental impact study. The original version showed potential issues with groundwater contamination. William commissioned a second study with adjusted parameters. Meaning? Meaning he told them exactly what to test for and what to ignore, Daniel said bluntly. The site had been a manufacturing plant in the 60s. There was contamination, but containing it would have made the project financially unviable. I sat back, processing this. Was anyone harmed? No. William spent millions on an underground containment system that wasn't required by the amended study. He did the right thing, just not through the right channels. The paperwork shows a clean environmental report followed by voluntary remediation. But it would look like he falsified environmental reports, then covered his tracks when he got cold feet, Daniel finished. It would trigger investigations, lawsuits. It could sink the company. I closed my eyes briefly. And Matthew knows this? I don't see how he could. The original report was buried. But if he's been digging, I thanked Daniel and left, my mind racing. This was worse than I'd anticipated. Not just reputation damage, but potential criminal liability. The company William had built, the legacy he'd left me to protect, could be destroyed by our son's vindictiveness. I made my decision driving back to the office. There would be no negotiation, no middle ground. Matthew had chosen this path, and I would ensure he walked it alone. Back at Coleman headquarters, I summoned David Wright and our security chief, Michael Torres. I need everything we have on Matthew's activities at the company, I said without preamble. Expenses, communications, client interactions. Everything. They exchanged glances. We've already compiled most of that, David said. for the termination record. I need more, I insisted. I need leverage. For the next several hours, we combed through 5 years of records, credit card statements, email archives, security footage. Slowly, a pattern emerged, one of small corruptions that had, over time, grown bolder. Inflated expense reports, a corporate apartment used for personal entertaining, company resources directed to a side venture he'd never disclosed, promises made to clients that directly contradicted company policy. And then we found it. Emails between Matthew and a competitor, discussing proprietary information about the Anderson contract. Not just sabotage, corporate espionage, a criminal offense. I felt nothing as I reviewed the evidence. Not anger, not disappointment, just cold certainty that I was doing what needed to be done. At 6 p.m., my phone rang. Matthew. "Time's up, Mom," he said without preamble. "What's it going to be?" "I think we should discuss this in person," I replied evenly. "Can you meet me at the house in an hour?" A pause. "Fine, but I'm not changing my terms." "I wouldn't expect you to." I arrived first, letting myself into the home where I'd lived with William for 3 decades, the home where we'd raised our son. I set my briefcase on the dining room table and waited. Matthew arrived exactly on time, looking tired but determined. He'd lost weight in the week since William's death, his tailored suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. "I assume you've reached a decision," he said, remaining standing. "I have." I opened my briefcase and removed a folder. "But first, I want to understand exactly what you're threatening to do if I don't reinstate you." He smiled thinly. "I think you know. Dad wasn't as squeaky clean as his reputation suggests. River Point, for instance." I kept my expression neutral despite the jolt of confirmation. "And you'd damage his legacy out of spite. I'd protect what's rightfully mine." He leaned forward. "He built that company for me. Everyone knows that." "He built that company for its own sake," I corrected. "Because creating something meaningful was important to him. The fact that you see it only as an inheritance speaks volumes." "Save the moralizing, Mom. What's your answer?" I slid the folder across the table. "This is my answer." He opened it, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to dawning horror as he read the documents inside. The evidence of his corporate espionage, the communication with our competitor, the forensic accounting report detailing his misappropriation of company funds. "This is nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Trivial violations at most. 3 felony counts isn't trivial, Matthew." I kept my voice steady. "Neither is the civil liability. You'll lose your professional licenses, possibly serve time." The color drained from his face. "You wouldn't." "I've already spoken to the district attorney," I lied smoothly. "They're prepared to file charges on Monday unless I intervene." He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "You'd send your own son to prison? You were willing to destroy your father's legacy," I replied. "Are we really so different?" His hands shook as he closed the folder. "What do you want?" "Your complete separation from Coleman Developments. Sign the agreement on page 12. Full confidentiality. No contact with employees, clients, or board members. In exchange, we don't pursue criminal charges. And if I refuse, then I protect the company by any means necessary." I met his gaze unflinchingly. "Your father spent his life building something honorable. I won't let you destroy it." For a long moment, we stared at each other across the table. Mother and son, now adversaries. I searched his face for some remnant of the boy I'd raised, the child I'd loved. I found nothing familiar. Finally, he reached for a pen and signed the agreement with a violent scrawl. "You've won," he said, voice hollow. "Happy now?" This was never about winning, Matthew. It was about consequences. Something you've avoided your entire life. He stood. "I hope it was worth it. Destroying your family to save a company. You destroyed our family the moment you decided your father's death was an opportunity rather than a tragedy." I gathered the signed documents, my hands steady. "The company was just collateral damage you were willing to accept." I watched him walk to the door, shoulders slumped in defeat. "Matthew," I called after him. He paused without turning. "William loved you. Despite everything, He believed you could be better than this. That's a gift you never deserved. He left without another word. I sat alone in the quiet house, the signed agreement in my hands. Victory achieved, but hollow. Not because I regretted my actions, but because they had been necessary at all. I had protected William's legacy. I had ensured Coleman developments would continue as he had intended. I had won. But as I sat in the gathering darkness, I finally allowed myself to weep, not for the son I had lost, but for the son he had never truly been.